Hello everyone, Reverend Annette here again, and today I'm going to read you the story about Mary from the Jessie Tree. "I can see it all in my head," said Mr. Butterfield suddenly. "I have to work while I can picture it." As he worked, Mr. Butterfield went on with the story, even though no one had asked him to. Mary was a good girl. Everyone said so. In fact, people probably never spoke about her at all, because gossips are only interested in people's faults and mistakes, and Mary did nothing wrong. She was promised in marriage to the local carpenter, Joseph. The idea pleased her, because it pleased everyone else, and happiness made Mary happy. It was a warm day, a low sun. The olive trees wore capes of light. The herbs between her fingers gave off a dizzying fragrance. The figure in white, striding along the roadway, reflected the sun so brightly as to dazzle Mary. "Greetings, Mary," he said. "Don't be afraid. God holds you in his mind and in his heart. I have news for you." Mary did not jump up or run into the house. She simply greeted the stranger. "The Lord has chosen you, Mary, to give birth to a son. You must call him Jesus." Mary did not faint or laugh, though her face grew paler. "How can that be? I'm not even married." "Mary, you're the most blessed woman alive. God's Spirit will overshadow you. He will entrust you with his own son," said the angel, "if you are willing." Mary did not protest or cry. She did not speak of the shame her family would feel, the things Joseph would say. She simply lowered her head. "Let it be as God wishes," was all she said. Then the angel was gone, and so was Mary's good name. "What's wrong with the name Mary?" asked the boy. "It's a perfectly good name." "Her reputation, I mean," said Mr. Butterfield. "Mary's reputation was gone. After all, who's going to marry a girl who's already expecting someone else's baby? And who's going to believe a girl who says she's been talking to an angel?" "Joseph must have," suggested the boy. "Must he indeed? Must he?" said Mr. Butterfield, with an "I know better" sort of look. "If you think that, you're quite mistaken." Expecting a child? Joseph was appalled. That spotless, devout, modest young girl everyone spoke so well of was expecting a child? The girl he was supposed to marry? Well, not any more. Joseph's chisel dug into the wood he was carving, as if he were cutting Mary out of his heart. No marriage for him. "A wife like that you can do without," said his mother that evening, wagging her head, wagging her hands. Then Joseph dreamed a dream. It cut into his sleep like the teeth of a saw. It was so real. It burnt through his closed eyelids and blinded him. It was so bright. "Don't be afraid to marry Mary," said the angel in his dream. "She has done nothing wrong. The child inside her was placed there by God. He trusts her. So should you. Marry Mary." The dream trickled out of Joseph's head like sawdust from a lathe, but the joy and fear remained. Joseph lay on his bed staring at the ceiling. He would marry Mary. A woman more perfect than even he had realised. But now, of course, she would never be entirely his, for first and foremost, she and the child inside her belonged to God. And what a responsibility, to raise and clothe and feed and educate the Son of God. A tall order for a simple village carpenter. Joseph was late opening his workshop that morning. "So he was a carpenter, just like you," said the boy. "Oh no, lad," said Mr. Butterfield with a sad little smile. "Nothing like me. For one thing, he had a son to look after, didn't he?" The next story is called Jumping for Joy. pinched up some sawdust from the floor and trickled it into his shirt pocket. "Your mother won't thank you for that when it comes to wash day," said Mr. Butterfield. "She won't mind. She'll think it's sand. She says it's like the souvenir of the holiday, the sand in the suitcase." "If you met an angel, Mr. Butterfield, would you be happy or scared?" "Bit of both, I suppose. Bit of each, like Mary." And he went on with his story. Mary went to visit her cousin Elizabeth. 2 women, both expecting a baby, both with extraordinary stories to tell. Anyway, pregnant women always have things to talk about. Names and worries, clothes and hopes, feeding and fears, sickness, birth and happiness. But even before they met, even as Elizabeth walked up the path to Mary's door, their children were already in touch. The first Elizabeth knew of her cousin's visit was a riot of joy inside her. The baby seemed to be leaping and kicking like King David when he danced before the Lord. Elizabeth hurried outside into the garden, puzzled but laughing and clutching her sides, and there stood her cousin Mary smiling. "He knows! My baby knows! He sensed it!" Elizabeth gasped. "Mary, Mary, blessings on you! The blessings of every mother in the world are on you now, and on your unborn baby. Feel, feel, as you came near, the baby inside me turned somersaults for pure joy." Mary laid her hands on her cousin's stomach. Her own baby's movements were still too tiny to be felt. It was like a magnet turning towards north. It was like a weathercock turning in the wind. It was like the oceans being tugged to and fro by the moon. The child in Elizabeth's womb sensed the closeness of Mary's baby, turning in his watery world, and reached out a hand. This other child was why he would struggle into the light of day. Here was his reason to live. "Oh, Mary," cried Elizabeth, "my baby is jumping for joy." "That's John," said the boy. "The baby who's leaping for joy. That's the baby who has to be called John, right? Angel's orders." "Angel's orders," Mr. Butterfield agreed. "But nobody knows that yet. Remember, old Zechariah hasn't been able to speak a word since that shock in the temple." "Scary," said the boy, and waited. "People fret about you when you get older," said Mr. Butterfield a few minutes later. "I dare say they fretted about Zechariah." "Because he wouldn't speak?" "Yes, and because he was behaving oddly too. I suppose. I'm only guessing, mind." "It would make you behave oddly," the boy agreed, "a thing like that." Zechariah's family fretted about him, for he was old and frail. For 9 months now he had been unable to speak. They just prayed God would spare him long enough to see his son born. But Zechariah was not sick. He had lost the power of speech, it's true, but illness had not taken it from him. God had silenced him. But he had given him something far more wonderful in return, a son. The time came for the child to be named. The neighbours expected him to bear his father's name. That was the tradition. First son, named after the father. But Zechariah wrote wildly on the air. "Look," said the neighbours, "he wants to say something. Fetch the wax tablet and the stylus." Then Zechariah wrote, "His name is John." Like the Red Sea splashing back onto its dry seabed, words spilled back into Zechariah's throat. "His name is John," he said again and again. "His name is John. His name is John. His name is John." Then he ran to the window and bellowed it into the street, so that a whole flock of doves flew up from the roof opposite. "His name is John." The church rang with noise. A starling fluttered about in the organ loft. The Death Watch Beatles fell silent. Mr. Butterfield's chisel began to peck away at the Jessie tree like a spring woodpecker. Suddenly he could picture exactly in his mind how the bough should look. "That's my name," said the boy. "John." "Is that a fact?" said the old man. But he was paying such attention to his work that it was hard to say if he'd heard or not. Tongues of wood curled from under the tip of his chisel as if they were shaping themselves into words. He worked on, rounding foreheads, creasing robes into pleats and folds. He worked like a man inspired. He didn't notice when the boy slipped away, seeing as he did only the grain of the wood and the wood shavings falling to the ground like the molted feathers of angels. Well, that's the end of our story today, but I expect we'll hear more about Mary and Joseph next time. Bye for now.